Ashes of the Last Dragon, Chapter 1. Cole's boots slapped against the sodden ground as he hurried through the winding lanes of Ferrowell. A bitter wind whistled between the cramped, timber-framed houses, carrying the scent of damp earth and the faint, unsettling tang of burning. Though no one openly mentioned it here out of fear, the rumours persist. The year was sometime in the 14th century, and yet, with the gloom in the air, it felt like the end of days. Ever since rumours of a horrible new plague spread across the countryside, Ferrowell had taken on a haunted, watchful silence. More than one villager had already succumbed to the fever, leaving bleak emptiness in households that once rang with lively chatter. The sickness was in the streets. He had already passed someone collapsed against a wall, shivering violently. Upon his return, a body was being quietly carted away. A few miles earlier, Cole had stood in the apothecary's cramped shop, his heart hammering in his chest as Mistress Helen, gaunt-faced and grim, handed him a small pouch of pungent herbs. He clung to that pouch now, as though it were a precious jewel, for it might be all that stood between his sister, Lily, and a swift, terrible end. He had left home at daybreak, the moment he realized Lily's cough had gone from a mild tickle to something rasping and violent. The rumor was that once that cough settled into a person's lungs, they had scant days, if not hours, to live. The plague had raged for only a few short weeks, but its velocity seemed unstoppable. Passing under a stone arch near the center of the village, he glimpsed movement in the corners of his eye. Neighbors, their faces drawn, peered from behind shutters and half-open doors. He avoids eye contact out of guilt. If people knew Lily was sick, he was sure they'd turn on him. Every sound, a sneeze, a wheeze, a ragged exhale, seemed to echo unnaturally against the stone walls. Nobody wanted to step onto the streets unless they absolutely had to. Several folks had already lost relatives, and the rest huddled in fear, waiting for the next sign of sickness to appear. Cole quickened his pace, determined to get back to Lily as fast as his legs would carry him. He couldn't help replaying the last conversation he'd had with Mistress Helen just an hour before, her voice subdued, her eyes mirroring his own dread.
"I've tried everything I know,"
she'd whispered, pushing the pouch into his hands.
"This is stronger than willow bark, might help with fever and coughing. But Cole, if things worsen, I have one last remedy I can bring."
She lowered her gaze.
"If none of this helps Lily, you'll need to find someone with deeper knowledge. Someone who uses unusual methods. There is an alchemist in the next village."
In Highmill, he was rumoured to deal in dark or forbidden practices. If Mistress Helen was referring him outright, things were indeed dire. Cole inhaled, tasting the smoky tang that drifted through Ferrowell's alleyways. Word had spread that some towns had resorted to burning corpses to stop the contagion from spreading. Whether that was the source of the acrid smell, or if it came from hearth fires kept blazing to ward off disease, he couldn't tell. He only knew it conjured images of blackened bodies on makeshift pyres, enough to send his stomach twisting in revulsion. He prayed, desperately, that Lily would not suffer that fate. His was near home with a sweat despite the cold. At last, he reached the small wooden door of his home, breath catching in his throat. A battered sign, his father's old blacksmith crest, hung crookedly near the entrance. The blackened hammer and anvil symbol felt like a cruel reminder. His father had died 2 years prior in a tragic forge accident. Not long after, his mother had slipped away, leaving him and Lily behind in quiet despair. He paused, wrestling with the latch, heart pounding a frantic cadence. 1,000 times he had asked himself why their mother had gone, whether heartbreak, fear of poverty, or something darker had driven her away. Whatever the reason, he'd been forced to assume responsibilities far beyond his 18 years. He finally pushed the door open. The interior was dim, lit by a single oil lamp near the small hearth. A wave of stale, feverish heat greeted him. In the far corner, separated by a thin, tattered curtain for meager privacy, he heard Lily's laboured breathing, a weak, rasping sound that seized him with dread. Before he could reach her bedside, Miss Rosley rose from where she knelt, wringing out a cloth in a basin of cloudy water. She was in her late 20s, her hazel eyes underscored by deep shadows of fatigue. She had lost her father to this same plague only a week ago, yet here she was, tending Lily without a trace of hesitation. She had been a near-constant presence in Cole and Lily's life ever since their mother vanished, doing her best to fill the gap left by absent parents. Because Miss Rosley had no remaining family of her own, she threw herself into helping Cole and Lily as though they were her kin. In a way, they were. Pain had bound them together.
Cole,
Ms. Rosley greeted softly, brushing back loose strands of tawny hair from her face.
I'm so glad you're back. She's getting worse.
Her voice trembled as she placed the cloth on Lily's forehead.
I tried to keep the fever down, but it keeps climbing.
Cole's insides lurched at the sight of Lily sprawled on the thin mattress. Her cheeks flushed a dark crimson from fever, yet her lips tinged an unsettling blue. Her hair, damp with sweat, clung to her forehead in tangled curls. She coughed, an awful rattling sound, and Miss Rosley flinched, as though it were her own lungs tearing.
Thank you,
Cole murmured, stepping closer. He knelt by the bedside, carefully lifting Lily's head.
I brought this,
he said, showing Miss Rosley the pouch of herbs.
Mistress Helen says it may buy us some time, maybe keep the fever under control.
Miss Rosley's eyes shone with hope and dread in equal measure.
We'll try anything.
She moved aside to give him room. Cole scooped a small portion of the bitter-smelling mixture into a cup of lukewarm water, stirring until the liquid turned a murky brown. Holding Lily's head with one hand, he gently tipped the cup to her lips, coaxing her to drink. Each swallow seemed a battle, as though her throat fought to reject every drop. When Lily sank back against the pillow, her eyelashes fluttering, Ms. Rosley pressed the cloth to her forehead again. Cole noticed the new lines of worry etched around Ms. Rosley's mouth. She was only in her late 20s, yet sorrow had aged her in the last few days.
She hasn't eaten.
Ms. Rosley said quietly.
Barely any water stays down. She's exhausted, Cole. And her cough.
She trailed off, letting the dire truth settle in the air between them. Cole set the cup aside with trembling fingers. The pungent aroma of the herbs clung to the small room, mingling with the stale odor of sweat and illness.
We'll keep trying,
he forced out, more to reassure himself than Ms. Rosley. I won't let her go like this. Ms. Rosley sighed, offering him a pained smile.
She's strong, Cole, just like you. She won't give in easily.
He wanted to believe that, needed to believe it. But every laboured breath Lily took reminded him that time was running out. Images of the bodies carried through Farewell's streets just days before resurfaced in his mind. Sheets stained with blood, the hushed sobs of loved ones trailing behind the carts. He swallowed hard, focusing on Lily's shallow rise and fall of her chest. He could not, would not, lose her. Rising stiffly, he looked around the cramped space. Their home was meagre, a single main room with a small hearth for cooking and warmth, plus a sagging cot in the corner that used to belong to their father. A worn curtain separated Lily's sleeping space to offer a fraction of privacy. The one small window near the door let in a sliver of greyish daylight, giving everything a pale, sickly cast.
Cole,
Ms. Rosley ventured, following his gaze.
There's something else. People say the plague is far worse in the villages beyond Farewell. They talk about towns, burning the dead to stop the spread.
Her face pinched with worry.
I don't know if it's true, but I overheard a traveller who claimed that in Oaksford, pyres burned day and night. He said the ashes fell like a faint snowfall for hours.
Cole felt his pulse quicken. Days earlier, he'd heard a snippet of the same rumour. Something about entire families lost. Ashes drifting on the breeze in Highmill. The plague devouring everything it touched.
Mistress Helen told me about an alchemist in High Mill,
he said, fighting to keep his voice steady.
She hinted that if Lily doesn't improve soon, we might have to try more extreme measures. Maybe that means travelling to High Mill myself. If the local remedies won't help her, I have no choice.
Miss Rosley's brow creased.
But the roads are dangerous now. People avoid travelling unless it's absolutely necessary. Some say there are more than just sickness and desperate refugees on the routes. They say brigands have taken advantage. But who can say if it's just fear talking?
He remembered how Mistress Helen had lowered her voice when she mentioned the alchemist. There was a sense of dread attached to that name, as if the man toyed with arts better left alone. But if those arts could save Lily... Cole pushed the thought of danger aside.
I'd face worse than brigands if it meant saving her,
he said with quiet resolve, eyes never leaving Lily's form.
I'll go if I must.
Miss Rosley dipped her head in agreement.
I knew you would.
She hesitated, then placed a gentle hand on his shoulder.
Your father would be proud. You're doing what you can.
Cole closed his eyes for a moment, a surge of grief lancing through him. In his mind's eye, he saw his father at the forge, shaping molten iron with expert blows, smoke rising in swirling plumes, sparks dancing across the air. How many times had he stood at his father's side, marveling at his skill? He'd been barely 16 when the accident happened. A flying shard of superheated metal had pierced his father's neck. The memory still made him shudder. And his mother? She had slipped away shortly after, a ghost leaving no trace. Grief, or desperation, or something else. He never knew.
Dad,
he whispered, half under his breath.
I wish you were here.
Even as the words left him, he knew there'd be no response, just the faint crackle of the hearth and Lily's strained breathing. Time ticked by with agonizing slowness. Ms. Rosley busied herself mixing more water and herbs, checking Lily's forehead, speaking in hushed tones to soothe her feverish moans. Cole hovered between them, feeling utterly powerless. He wanted to gather Lily in his arms and make the sickness vanish by sheer will. He wanted to lash out at whatever dark force had unleashed this plague on the world. The fact that rumors pointed to entire regions grappling with the same devastation only deepened his despair. If skilled physicians and wise men throughout Europe were helpless, how could he, an 18-year-old with a meager stash of coins, do better? Yet he refused to surrender. Hours crawled by, marked by Lily's fits of coughing. She trembled, sometimes muttering incoherently, as though drifting in and out of feverish dreams. Ms. Rosley swapped the damp cloth on Lily's head whenever it grew warm, but nothing fully eased her suffering. Outside, twilight descended. The sky, a bruised swirl of purples and greys. A few distant torches flickered along Ferrowell's main road. Cole glanced through the narrow window, noting the hush that had fallen over the village. It wasn't just the hush of evening. This was the hush of dread, when everyone locked their doors, praying they wouldn't be next. A sharp rapping at the door startled him. Cole tensed, exchanging a look with Ms. Rosley. Visitors were rare these days. Most people avoided others, as though even a friendly hello could spread the plague. Edging to the entrance, Cole eased it open a crack. Outside stood Mistress Helen herself, her face lined with worry.
I had to come,
she said softly, stepping into the house. She carried a bundle in her arms.
The gossip around town is that Lily's taken ill. I brought more supplies, and...
She handed over a small jar of foul-smelling paste.
Rub this on her chest. It might loosen the phlegm in her lungs.
Cole's throat tightened with gratitude.
You didn't have to.
I did.
Mistress Helen cut him off, her voice trembling with fierce empathy.
Your father fixed my father's plough once without charging a coin because we were struggling for food that winter. I won't forget that kindness.
She looked to Lily, her lips pursed.
How is she?
Ms. Rosley responded, voice subdued.
No real change. the fever won't break.
Mistress Helen nodded, stepping close to Lily's bedside. She peered at the girl's face, gently lifted Lily's eyelids, then let out a slow exhale.
I'm sorry.
She said, turning to Cole, checking him for signs of infection.
I'm doing all I can, but this sickness, it devours people from the inside. You must be prepared.
Cole braced himself, forcing steel into his voice.
We're not giving up. If she's still like this by dawn, I'm going to High Mill. Maybe that alchemist can help.
Mistress Helen didn't argue.
That might be best. The roads are risky, but if you've the courage, it could save her.
She paused, adjusting her shawl.
I've heard they burn the fallen over there to keep the spread at bay, and some say that the ashes themselves carry the sickness.
A grim hush followed her words. No one knew if that rumor was truth or superstition, but the fear was real enough. He realized this when Mistress Helen wiped her hands after handing Cole the medicine, just before he departed the apothecary. Ms. Rosley stared down at the floorboards, remembering her father's final hours. Cole thought of the travelers' hushed stories, how in some parts of the land, it wasn't just the stench of burning, but a haze of grey drifting through the air, settling on rooftops and fields, as if the entire countryside lay under a toxic blanket. The idea turned his stomach, but if High Mill was where the alchemist lived, he had to go there regardless. Mistress Helen set the jar of paste on a rough-hewn table near Lily's bed.
Apply it every few hours,
She said, gentler now.
If you need more, I'll leave it near my door.
Cole dipped his head in acknowledgement, feeling a whirlwind of emotion, gratitude, fear, and an urgent sense that dawn couldn't come soon enough.
Thank you,
he repeated. He escorted Mistress Helen outside, where the night air felt sharper, more hostile. She left quickly, shoulders hunched as though anticipating an unseen threat. Returning inside, Cole found Ms. Rosley wiping Lily's face. The lamp's flame flickered, dancing across Lily's damp skin. Her breath came in stuttering, uneven gasps. Just get through the night, he thought fiercely. He knelt again, rubbing the pungent paste onto Lily's chest. The scent made his eyes water, but if it could loosen the death grip on her lungs, it was worth any discomfort. Minutes blurred into hours. Ms. Rosley dozed upright in a corner for a brief moment, head lolling to the side, while Cole maintained a silent vigil. Every so often, Lily coughed, rattling the hush. The flame in the oil lamp guttered, requiring him to trim the wick and add a bit more oil. In the gloom, he felt cut off from the world beyond these walls. Only the plague existed, monstrous and unrelenting. He raked a hand through his disheveled dark hair, glancing at Lily's face. Though her cheeks were flushed, the rest of her skin looked pallid and wan. Her lips had a cracked dryness to them. He forced more water into her mouth, leaning her head carefully and massaging her throat to encourage swallowing. She moaned but didn't wake. Guilt stabbed him. He was powerless, forced to watch her waste away. In a low voice, Cole finally confided in Ms. Rosley, who had stirred from her light nap.
In the morning, I'll leave early,
he said, husky from exhaustion.
If you'll stay with her.
Ms. Rosley nodded, eyes red from lack of sleep.
I'll stay as long as it takes,
she vowed.
It's me and you, Cole. We protect Lily. I must step out tomorrow to check on a couple of my neighbours, friends of my dad. It won't be long. I'll remain with her.
He squeezed her hand. The house fell quiet again, aside from Lily's laboured breaths. Outside, a dog barked somewhere in the distance, followed by tense silence. Were the neighbours awake too, battling the same illness behind their locked doors? Cole fought to stay awake, pacing the small interior to keep his blood flowing. He checked Lily's temperature repeatedly, applying fresh, cool cloths to her forehead. Every moment felt stolen from a relentless clock. If dawn would only hurry, then he could dash to High Mill, find the alchemist, and return with something stronger than these meagre herbs. He pictured Lily healthy again, scolding him for being so serious. The memory put a slight tremor in his hands as he wrung out another cloth. When the first light of day finally broke through the window, it revealed Lily in the same tortured state. Her breathing had not improved. If anything, it had grown more shallow, more ragged. Cole couldn't delay. With bleary eyes, he gathered the meager coins he possessed and what few valuables might be traded: his father's old blacksmith chisel, a small hammer, some leftover metal scraps. They could be bartered if coin alone failed. Ms. Rosley, eyes heavy-lidded, helped him bundle the items into a sturdy sack.
You'll be careful?
She asked, her voice wavering.
I've heard the roads are, well, not as safe as they used to be.
Cole hoisted the sack over one shoulder. The weight felt meager compared to the crushing worry in his heart.
I'll be fine. I have nothing worth stealing except time, and that was already slipping away. I always travel with my father's hammer when leaving town,
he assured her, though his chest felt hollow.
Look after Lily, make sure she keeps taking the herbs, and apply the paste. If there's any sign of improvement.
I'll send someone to find you.
Miss Rosley finished, offering a thin smile.
Don't worry about that. Just hurry back.
He nodded, stepping to Lily's bedside one last time. Leaning in, he pressed his forehead lightly to hers, feeling the heat radiating off her fevered skin.
Hold on,
he whispered.
I'm not leaving you behind. I'll bring back a cure, and this will just be a bad memory.
Her eyes remained closed, her mouth parted in shallow breaths. Cole's heart ached at how frail she looked, barely more than a child, battered by forces she had no power to fight. He found himself blinking back tears as he straightened. Ms. Rosley gently rested a hand on his arm.
She's strong, and she has us,
she said.
Go.
Cole inhaled, steadying himself. With a final nod, he crossed to the door, stepping into the pale morning light. An unseasonable chill hung in the air, underscoring the tension that had claimed all of Farewell. Sparing no time, he began his journey along the narrow dirt road that led toward the next village. The houses behind him looked bleary and forlorn in the dawn glow, silent witnesses to a mounting crisis. Somewhere, a rooster crowed half-heartedly, as though uncertain the day was worth greeting. His mind churned with questions. Could the alchemist's knowledge truly save Lily? Would he arrive soon enough to make a difference? What if the plague was unstoppable? Yet he forced these doubts aside, focusing on each purposeful step. For Lily's sake, he had to try. A glimmer of hope flared within him. Though overshadowed by dread, it was enough to push him forward. As he cleared the last row of houses, the air felt heavier, thick with something unseen. A faint grey dust clung to his sleeves, so light he almost didn't notice. He brushed it off absently, but the act left a lingering unease. Whether it was smoke from distant pyres or just morning mist, he couldn't say. With a resolute breath, Cole clutched the strap of his sack, determined to find the remedy no matter what horrors or truths lay ahead. Lily's life depended on it, and if the rumours were true, if the dead were truly burned in the next town, and ash spread across the land, he would face that grim reality head-on. In the hush of early morning, he left Farewell behind, stepping into a world that felt on the brink of collapse. Yet inside him, a fierce resolve took root. He would not let Lily become another casualty. No matter how many miles he had to walk, no matter how frightening the stories of the plague grew, he would return. And in that determination, he found the first spark of defiance against the darkness threatening to swallow them all.